Okay, next up we're going to string a 2018 Babolat Pure Drive. If you're stringing up a 2015 or 2018 Pure Drive, it's a little different than all the previous Pure Drives, which would be all of the old ones up to and including the 2012 Pure Drive. If you're stringing an older Pure Drive, they were the same all the way up until 2012. They were the same as all of the Aero Pro Drives up until the Aero Pro Drive ended in 2013, which means they only skip 8 head and 8 throat, and actually the tie-offs are the same places for both the Aero Pro Drives and the older Pure Drives. In fact, the grommet strips and bumper guards are interchangeable. This is a 2013 Aero Pro Drive, which is the last year that they made it before it became the Pure Aero in 2016. And you'll notice that the bumper guard is a solid bumper guard. It doesn't have the slots. If you have an older Pure Drive, particularly the 2012 Pure Drive, it has a slotted bumper guard. I used to string for a guy that played with the 2012 Pure Drive, and he would wear through bumper guards very quickly. And one day it occurred to me that the solid bumper guard, I was looking at the Aero Pro Drive side by side with the Pure Drive and noticed that the holes and the drilling seemed to be the same. Obviously the skips were the same, the tie-offs were the same. So it dawned on me that there was a very good chance that the bumper guards and grommet strips were interchangeable between the Aero Pro Drives and the Pure Drives, and that is indeed the case, because I started putting solid bumpers for this racket, an Aero Pro Drive, on his Pure Drives instead of the slotted bumper guards, and he was getting a little bit more durability that way, or at least thought he was. So the older Pure Drives and the Aero Pro Drives skipped 8 head, 8 throat. They tied off, the mains tied off down here at 6 throat, and your crosses tied off at 7 head and 10 throat, which was always a bit of a tight squeeze there. The tie-offs, whether it was a Pure Drive or an Aero Pro Drive, you always had that really tight tie-off down there. So they improved all that. So everything's different. So as of the 2015 Pure Drive, and they also changed it on the Pure Aeros too. But in 2015 and in continuing in 2018 with these, the skips are at 7 and 9 head, 7 and 9 throat, just like the Pure Aero. The tie-offs, the mains tie off here at 8 throat instead of 6 throat, and some slight improvements on the locations of where the crosses tie off as well. There's actually designated tie-offs. It's not symmetrical like it used to be. It's asymmetrical. You're supposed to start with your starting knot or your starting clamp on a given side, and the crosses are supposed to be run through in a particular way. It's a lot more. It's even more important on a Pure Aero now because of the slotted. Because of the way the bumper guard and the grommet strip, it's almost like an old school wooden racket where you've got slots going from this hole to this hole, but not from this hole to this hole. So it's important on all of them, but especially on the Pure Aeros, that they're started on the correct side and the crosses are done correctly. At any rate, so this skips 7 and 9 head, 7 and 9 throat. We're going to put RPM Blast in the mains at 50 pounds and Babolat Xcel in the crosses also at 50 pounds. So let's get started. I've already measured off the strings for the mains, for the RPM Blast. I've measured off 18 feet 9 inches, but these lengths are taking into account that I intend to use an extra starting clamp set up to bridge to the tension head. It's so that I don't have to cut as much string off of the reels. It conserves string when you're cutting from reels. So this length is enough for me to comfortably tie my knots, but not necessarily to reach the back of the gripper on the tension head, and certainly not enough to go around the Diablo and get to the back of the gripper. And the crosses, which I mentioned are Babolat Xcel, I'm using 17 feet. And again, I will expect to be bridging to the tension head with these lengths. I've got another video where I'm stringing this racket, and I didn't really have any commentary with it. It was just me stringing the racket. It's kind of boring. So this time I'll give you a little bit more information as we go along. I'm using the Yusuke method for starting my mains. That's how I start my mains pretty much all the time. The clamps have been cleaned. The clamps are being adjusted so that they squeeze the string just tight enough, but don't they're not over tightening the string. But the Yusuke method is a great way to start your mains. If you've never played around with it, you should try it. It does a number of things for you. I won't go into detail right now, all the merits of it, but it's a great way to start your mains. And you see me pinching the string with my fingers pressed right up against the side of the clamp. That's to feel, to make sure that there's absolutely no sliding through the clamps, which there shouldn't be. Like I said, I just cleaned them. But if I were to feel anything slipping or sliding through my fingers, you obviously would start over. And I usually do this test on the first 4 mains, 2 on the left and 2 on the right, because that's when the clamps are subject to the most amount of force. And if they were going to slip, it's probably going to be on one of those initial pulls. Some people will mark the string with a marker or some kind of ink or crayon or something. I've heard of people putting a paper clip on the string, and then when they release the tension head, watching to see if the paper clip starts migrating away from the clamp. And I'm sure all of those methods work, but nothing seems to be as quick and efficient and surefire as just putting your fingers on the string when you release the tension head. Now, this is not slipping or sliding, but I'm squeezing the string, and the reason I've got my fingers pressed against the side of the clamp is if it was sliding through the clamp, you wouldn't be able to see it. Most strings are solid and uniform and don't have markings on them, but maybe a textured string or something with a spiral on it, you might be able to see it if it was actually creeping through there ever so slowly. But most strings you can't see that on, so if you pinch it and your fingers remain pressed against the side of the clamp, there's nothing sliding. But if you're pinching a string and suddenly your fingers start moving away from the clamp, you can tell that it's slipping through. So that's when you see me pinching the string, that's to make sure that nothing is sliding as it shouldn't be. If you're not a stringer yourself and you're watching this video and you happen to be watching your local stringer string your racket or someone else's racket, be paying attention. Are they checking to see if the string is sliding through the clamp? Because you want your clamps adjusted so that they should be clamped just tight enough to hold the string so that you don't damage or crush the string, especially softer strings or more delicate strings. Anybody can set the clamp so that it's too tight and then the string won't slip, but then you're crushing or denting the string. I think if you go look at, I've got a video that's called Poorly Strung Rackets or something like that, and if you go watch it, I didn't think it would show up on camera, but it actually did, where I showed the indentations and the marks from the teeth of the clamps that some other stringer was using to string that racket, and they clearly had the clamp pressure way too hard on the strings. So you want to be gentle on the strings, all strings. So watch someone and see if they are using some method. The paper clip that I mentioned, are they putting their fingers here when they release the tension head? Are they checking to see that they're not losing tension somewhere? Because the whole stringing process is about not losing tension along the way. For example, watch someone, when they clamp a string, do they clamp pretty far away from the frame and the grommet? If so, they're leaving a bunch of untensioned string here. That's not consistent. Should always be seeing a clamp get clamped as close as it can get to the frame and to the grommets, so that there's no tension loss. You'll also notice that I only string one string ahead on each side. I know that the US RSA says that you can string 3 strings on one side and then 6 on the other. In other words, you can get 3 strings ahead. So 3 on one side, then 6 on this side, then finish up on one side and come back. But I don't think that keeps as even distribution of pressure on the frame and consistency on your tension. So you'll notice if you were to pause at any moment while I'm stringing the racket, there's always the exact same number of strings on the left and the right, like there is right now. When the 2 clamps are at the same end, whether they're both down here or both up here, the strings are the same number. So in this case, there's 3 on the left and 3 on the right. So, and in a moment, there'll be 1 string more on the left side than the right, but then I'll immediately go back. So you'll see me string 2 strings on one side in succession, but it's because I'm behind one. So for example, right now they're even. If I tension this string, once I get it clamped off, the left side of the racket now has 1 more string tensioned than the right. So right now I'm 1 ahead on the left. But now I'm going to tension 2 strings in succession on the right side of the frame. The first tensioning brings the racket back to being even, where they'll both have 4 and 4. And because I already have this string in my hand, it just makes sense to make the next tension string to be on that side as well. So rather than spinning the racket all the way around yet again, I can just pull this through, make sure there's no twists in the string, and tension that. So everything is as balanced and as even as possible. So now one side's ahead by 1. By tensioning this string, it now brings it back to even, and so on. I always pre-weave my upper crosses because that means I don't have blocked holes to deal with, I don't have crossovers on the outside of the frame, and I have less friction occurring in a moment after these mains are completed. So I put in the 3rd cross first. I will weave them in reverse order, 3rd, 2nd, 1st. But then they will be tensioned in their normal order, which is 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, etc. So that's the 3rd, and it needs to be going this way because the top cross needs to be going that way to be tied off at its a designated spot here. But since there's 2 skips at the top of the frame, again 7 and 9 head, by putting these strings, these cross strings in place early on, particularly the 2nd cross, It's the one that will actually have additional friction from this black string looping around on the outside of the frame. So now that all of those strings are where they need to be, we'll resume finishing up with the mains. And I'm putting a ribbon here and an awl in that hole at 7 throat where the bottom cross is going to be later, to try to keep an make it a little easier to deal with that blocked hole at the very end of the racket. And now, as long as I make sure the black string is underneath, I've got all the light colored strings, the multi-filament, above, and the black string is, the loop of black string on the outside of the frame is underneath, then there will be no crossovers over here. If I put my hand here, you can see that all the light colored strings are above my hand, and the black loop, the single black loop, is below my hand. So no crossovers. Less friction. Doesn't really take longer to do it this way. So now here's the, actually I think this will barely reach the tension head without using the starting clamp. And then the same thing over here. Make sure that the black string stays underneath this, which is pretty easy since that one's sticking up anyway. These are Parnell knots that I use as finishing knots. And now we're on to the crosses. Since these crosses are being done at 50 pounds just like the mains, I don't have to change the tension on the machine. We're already set to go. Now, because the gauge of this multi-filament is a little different than these mains, there is a need to adjust the pressure on the clamp. Because again, especially with the multi-filament being a more delicate string, I want to have the pressure tight enough that it doesn't slip, but doesn't cause the string any harm either. So there's no sliding there. So now the black string is looping on the outside of the frame where this string, the second cross, passes through over that grommet here at 9 head. So right now there's more friction. If I pull this string, it's rubbing against the polyester string that's there. They pass near each other, or actually touch each other. So this loop here, this is why one of the reasons I did a pre-weave. If I didn't have all this string here and I only had this top cross done, I would have roughly 20 feet of string, well, 16 feet of string here that I would have to weave through a blocked hole, then drag all of that string through a friction point and burning the string and putting more wear and tear on the string than necessary, over through another blocked grommet, and then pull that through another friction point. So there'll be a lot of string getting pulled through 2 friction points, and none of that's necessary. This loop of string only needs to be long enough to reach the tension head, which I just did. So now I only need to pull a little more than 2 feet of string through these friction points. And I'm going to pull this a lot slower than you'll see me pulling any of the other strings, because the rest of these strings from number 3 all the way down, they don't have this friction to contend with. So especially a delicate string, you want to be nice and gentle pulling this particular loop closed. So I always take a little more time and care when there's friction involved here. There'll be some friction involved down here on the final cross here going through 7th throat, but by then you've installed the bulk of all of the hitting occurs up here. So we care about the preserving the strings up here much more so than we do, say, the very last cross. And if you keep your crosses straight as you go, you'll be in a much better position at the end of the racket. So if you keep your crosses straight, you won't have to do as much at the end of the racket, and you'll also get better tension maintenance and a more accurate tension to begin with than having your cross strings bowed or curved. That's robbing you of tension and of tension maintenance over the long haul. And you also want to get that cross, not only do you want it straight, but ideally you want to get that cross to a straight position before the tension head stops pulling. Now you'll see I've got some twists over here. You'll see a lot of stringers will pull this through, they'll reach over here, do this, and then pull on the string. All that did If they do that, all they're doing is moving the twists that are on the outside of the frame to the inside of the string bed. What you want is this loop of string to have no twists in it long before it gets to the frame. Like this. So now if you look that loop is nice and flat, I don't have to force the twists out of it. This means there's no kinks or twists in the string on the outside of the frame going through these bends where it would be weakest. Again, it's just taking more care, a little time and a little attention and a little care to what you're doing. So tension, hold the cross straight as it's being tensioned. And try to get this loop to be nice and flat before it reaches the frame. And then rinse and repeat. If you didn't already notice it, another thing that you should do, it's a good idea, if you care about having less wear and tear on your strings, is you'll notice that I'm weaving one ahead. Most good stringers are going to weave their crosses one ahead. However, right now, technically, I've woven one ahead. I got that string in. But the bulk of the slack is still over here on this side. If I tension this string now, which is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this is the 6th cross, this is the 7th that I've already woven. So if I tension the 6th cross now, even doing what I've already told you, keeping it straight while the tension head's moving, etc. Once that's tensioned and I move this clamp here, there'll be more friction pulling this through with this loop. Whereas if I fan the string and bring most of this string through and leave only a loop long enough to reach the tension head, here I've made less wear and tear on this string because this string is running straighter right now. So try to pull all of the string through that you can and only use what you need to reach the tension head. So now the string is too short to do any weaving one ahead. The bottom cross ties off down here at 6 throat. My finishing knots, I use Parnell knots 99% of the time. The only time I will use possibly a pro knot is in real tight quarters. Like I mentioned before on the old Pure Drives and the old Aero Pro Drives, the bottom cross tied off up here at 10 throat, very, very close to where the outer main sits. And the top cross now ties off at 6 head. And before I even touch the crosses, you can see that they're very, very straight already as is. But I'm a perfectionist, or OCD, whatever you want to call it. So I will give them a few small taps to make them absolutely perpendicular to the mains. Because as you play with the racket, it's going to develop notches, and the strings have memory. So wherever you start them off, they'll try to stay there. So don't leave curves and bows in your strings. And if you're playing with your racket, you should strive to keep those straight. If you look down at your racket and your strings are a little off, put them back where they should be. You'll play more consistent tennis that way, and your strings will wear properly. And remember their home, so to speak. And that's it. We're all done. So there's a Poly Multi Hybrid on a 2018 Pure Drive at 50 pounds for both the mains and the crosses. Hope you enjoyed that. Thanks.